Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Praise and gratitude to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala for the grace given so that I can complete this research thesis. Previously, I would like to thank Mrs. Marsofiyati S.Pd M.Pd and Dr. Umi Widyastuti S.A.M.A. as my adversary lectors. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rara Anggita from Office Administration Education, Class of 2019, Faculty of Economic, State University of Jakarta. On this occasion, I would like to present my thesis entitled The Influence of Self-Efficacy and Peer Environment on Interest in Continuing Study to Higher Education in Students of 12 State Vocational High School, Jakarta. Chapter 1. Introduction. The background of this research begins with a discussion of the demographic bonus in Indonesia that will occur from 2020 to 2035. If we look at the generation classification table, the highest population levels are occupied by the millennial generation and Z generation, where the two generations enter the productive age, namely age 15 to 64 years. This demographic bonus can be used as an opportunity for the welfare of the population. However, quality human resources are still needed and can contribute to the country development. One of the factors that can improve the quality of human resources is education. In this study, researchers focus more on discussing at the vocational high school. Although vocational high school is better prepared for the world of work, however, there are no restrictions or rules that prohibit vocational high school graduates from going to college. Vocational high school graduates are still encouraged to continue their studies to higher education in order to avoid tough competition in the job market. When viewed from the level of education, vocational high school is the highest level that contributes to the unemployment rate in Indonesia with a percentage rate of 9.42%. One of the vocational high school in Jakarta that still remembers the low level of continuing study to higher education is 12 State Vocational High School, Jakarta. However, in this study, researchers saw a decrease in student interest in continuing their studies to higher education by 12.07%. The amount of student interest is determined by internal and external factors. Seen in the diagram, the factors that most influence students' interest in studying are self-efficacy and peer environment. Based on this background, the formulation and research objectives are obtained as follows. 1. Knowing the effect of self-efficacy on the interest in continuing study to higher education in students at 12 State Vocational High School, Jakarta. 2. Knowing the influence of the peer environment on the interest in continuing study to higher education in students at 12 State Vocational High School, Jakarta. 3. Knowing the effect of self-efficacy and peer environment on the interest in continuing study to higher education in students at 12 State Vocational High School, Jakarta. Chapter 2. Literature Review. Green theory in this study refers to the theory of planned behavior developed by Dosen in 1998. This theory has three factors to encourage intention, namely attitude toward the behavior, subjective norm, and perceived behavioral control. Next, there is supporting theory of each research variable. First, self-efficacy variable. Bandura in Lely et al. In 2019 defines that self-efficacy is an expectation of belief or expectation regarding a person's ability to perform a behavior in certain situation. Second, peer environment variables. Nyoman and Olga in Sari et al. In 2019 defines that the peer environment is the establishment of communication between people who have the same age maturity level. Third, interest in continuing study to higher education. Oriza and S.Pd in 2021 defined that interest is a feeling of willingness and interest that exists in each individual. So, that interest here is defined as a sense of willingness and interest in studying at the tertiary level. Next, relevant research. From these three studies, it was concluded that self-efficacy and peer environment partially or simultaneously influence the interest in continuing study to higher education. The following is the framework for this study, which produced three hypotheses, namely: 1. There is an influence of self-efficacy on the interest in continuing study to higher education in students at 12 State Vocational High School Jakarta. 2. There is an influence of the peer environment and the interest in continuing study to higher education in students at 12 State Vocational High School Jakarta. 3. There is an influence of self-efficacy and peer environment on the interest in continuing study to higher education in students at 12 State Vocational High School Jakarta. Chapter 3. Research Methods. The research took place from January to August 2023, which was conducted at 12 State Vocational High School Jakarta, which is located at Jalan Kebon Bawang 15B, nomor 15, RT 19 RW 2, Kelurahan Kebon Bawang, Kecamatan Tanjung Priok, Jakarta Utara. This research uses a quantitative approach and a survey method that utilizes a questionnaire in collecting data. The population in the study were 244 class 12 students at 12 State Vocational High School Jakarta for the 2023-2024 academic year. The sampling technique used is the proportional random sampling technique using Mrs. Excel with the random formula. The total of sample in the study were 152 students who were calculated using the Slovene formula with an error rate of 5%. The following are indicators of research variables that are measured using a Likert scale with a range of values from 1 to 5. Self-efficacy indicators are measured using dimension adapted and modified from Wahyuni and Yolanda in the article Self-Efficacy Profiles of Prospective Teachers, Students in Theory and Practice Courses of Microteaching Mathematics Education in 2019, which was compiled according to Bandura's theory. These dimensions are reduced to a number of indicators such as task difficult level, the behavior shown in the face of the text, strength in belief, individual expectation of ability, consider experience not as a barrier, and making experience the basis for increasing confidence. Peer environment indicators were adopted and modified from Desmita in the book Psychology of Student Development in 2014. These indicators were social interaction, individual involvement in interaction, peer support, becoming study partners, and increasing self-esteem. Indicators of interest in continuing education to higher education were adopted and modified from Slameto in the book Learning and Influence Factors in 2013. These indicators were feelings or pleasure, attention, willingness, interest, hope, and need. The data collection technique used in the study was a survey technique using a closed questionnaire. Data testing used SmartPLS software, which has two types of models, namely the outer model or measurement model and inner model or structural model. In the outer model, there are several tests such as convergent validity, discriminant validity, and composite reliability. In the inner model, there are several tests such as R-square, F-square, Q-square, path coefficient, and t-test. Because SmartPLS cannot carry out a simultaneous test, the researchers conduct a simultaneous test manually using the formula as stated. Chapter 4. Result and Discussion. The following is descriptive of the respondent in the study. There are three categorizations based on class, age, and gender. Based on the picture, it shows that the respondent in the study were class 12 students consisting of 7 classes with majors namely AKL, OTKP, BDP, and RPL. Respondent for class 12 AKL1 consisted of 22 students. Respondent for class 12 AKL2 consisted of 22 students. Respondent for class 12 OTKP consisted of 22 students. Respondent for class 12 BDP1 consisted of 21 students. Respondent for class 12 BDP2 consisted of 21 students. Respondent class
12 RPL1 consisted of 22 students, and Class 12 RPL2 respondent consisted of 22 students with a total sample of 152 people. For the age category, although at the same level, the respondents in the study were 16 years old students, there were 9 people, 17 years old students, there were 104 people, 18 years old student, there were 34 people, 19 years old student, there were 3 people, and student at 20 years old, there are 2 people. For the gender category, it shows that the majority of respondents in this study were female students, totaling 123 students with a percentage of 81%. The remaining 19% are male students with a total of 29 students. This research was processed using Smart PLS version 4 with the partial least square or PLS method. The data analysis performance consists of an outer model and inner model. The outer model in the study can be seen in the following figure. Convergent validity is measured using outer loading. An indicator is said to be good if it has an outer loading value greater than 0.7. The result of data processing states that all indicators and dimensions have an outer loading value of greater than 0.7 and meet convergent validity standard. Thus, it can be concluded that all variables are valid. In addition to being measured by outer loading, convergent validity is measured using the F value with criteria greater than 0.5. The result of data processing states that all variables have an F value greater than 0.5. Thus, it can be concluded that all variables, including dimension, have good convergent validity. Discriminant validity is measured using cross-loading with a value greater than 0.7 for each construct. It can be seen that the cross-loading value in each construct has a value of more than 0.7. Thus, it can be concluded that all variables in this study are valid and have met the standard of discriminant validity. The reliability test was measured using Cronbach alpha with a value greater than 0.7 and composite reliability greater than 0.7. This table shows that all variables and dimension have Cronbach alpha value and composite reliability greater than 0.7. Thus, it can be concluded that all variables and dimension have a good level of reliability. This table shows that the R-square value for the self-efficacy variable is 1.000 or 100%. This value indicates that the self-efficacy variable is fully influenced and can be explained by the dimension of magnitude or level, strength, and generality. The R-square for the variable interest in continuing study to higher education has a value of 0.693 or 69.3%. This value indicates that the variable interest in continuing study to higher education is influenced and can be explained by self-efficacy and peer environment variables of 69.3%, and the remaining 30.7% is influenced by other variables outside the variables in the study. Based on this table, it can be stated that the magnitude dimension has a high contribution to the self-efficacy variable of 405.945. The strength dimension has a high contribution to the self-efficacy variable of 468.587. The generality dimension has a high contribution to the self-efficacy variable of 482.222. Self-efficacy variable has a weak contribution to interest in continuing study to higher education of 0.118, and peer environment variables have a high contribution to interest in continuing study to higher education of 0.539. Based on this table, it shows that the Q-square value for the self-efficacy variable is 1.000. This value indicates that the dimension of magnitude or level, strength, and generality have predictive relevance and are able to explain the self-efficacy variable well. The Q-square value for the variable interest in continuing study to higher education is 0.680. This value indicates that the variable of self-efficacy and peer environment have predictive relevance and are able to explain the variable interest in continuing study to higher education well. The result of the first hypothesis test show the three dimensions of the self-efficacy variable have a contribution to the variable in influencing the interest variable to continue their studies to higher education. It can be seen that all dimensions have these statistic values greater than 1.97 and p-values less than 0.05. The dimension that most influence the variable is the magnitude or level dimension with a t-statistic value of 25.840 with a p-value of 0.000 less than 0.05. The self-efficacy variable on interest in continuing study to higher education has an original sample with a positive sign of 0.282 with a t-statistic value of 2.847 greater than t-table of 1.97 and p-value of 0.004 less than 0.05. So the first hypothesis is accepted. The result of testing the second hypothesis showed that the peer environment variable with an interest in continuing their study to higher education has an original sample with a positive sign of 0.602 with a t-statistic value of 6.220 greater than the t-table of 1.097 and p-statistic value of 0.000 are less than 0.05. So the second hypothesis is accepted. Simultaneous hypotheses were tested using the F-test formula with the criteria if the F-count is greater than the F-table, the hypothesis is accepted. Meanwhile, if the F-count is less than the F-table, the hypothesis is rejected. From this calculation, the calculated F-value is 17.325 greater than the F-table of 3.06. So the third hypothesis is accepted. Next, discussion. The first hypothesis in the study has a positive and significant effect on the interest in continuing study to higher education. This means that the higher the self-efficacy of students, the higher the interest of students at 12 State Vocational High School Jakarta to continue their studies to higher education. On this variable, the magnitude or level dimension has a greater influence than the other self-efficacy dimension. This hypothesis is supported by several previous studies, namely research from Hayrat et al. 2023, Alfarizi et al. 2022, Amirullah and Rafsanjani 2022, and Lase 2020, whose research results show that self-efficacy has a positive and significant influence on students' interest in continuing study to higher education. The better the self-efficacy of students, the higher the interest of students to continue their studies to higher education. The second hypothesis in this study has a positive and significant effect on the interest in continuing study to higher education. This means that the better the peer environment that students have, the higher the interest of students at 12 State Vocational High School Jakarta to continue study to higher education. This hypothesis is supported by several previous studies, namely research from Nugraha and Sukirno 2019, Rifai and Sukanti 2019, Permana et al. 2019, and Lasa 2020, whose research result shows that the peer environment has a positive and significant influence on students' interest in continuing their study to college. The better the peer environment for students, the higher the students' interest in continuing study to higher education. The third hypothesis in this study has a positive and significant effect simultaneously on the interest in continuing study to higher education. This means that the higher the self-efficacy and the better the peer environment that students have, the higher the interest of students at 12 State Vocational High School Jakarta to continue their studies to higher education. This hypothesis is supported by several previous studies, namely research from Pratewi et al. 2019, Septiwinahyu 2020, and Lasa 2020, whose research results show that self-efficacy and peer environment have a positive and significant influence together on student interest in continuing their studies to higher education. The higher the student's self-efficacy and the better the peer environment, the higher the student interest in continuing their education to college. Chapter 5. Closing. Conclusion. On this variable, the magnitude or level dimension has a greater influence than the other self-efficacy dimension. Self-efficacy has a positive and significant effect on the interest in continuing study to higher education. 2. Peer environment has a positive and significant effect on the interest in continuing study to higher education. And 3. Self-efficacy and peer environment have a positive and significant effect simultaneously on the interest in continuing their studies to higher education. Theoretical implication. The results of the research are expected to be able to provide additional knowledge and contribution, especially in the field of education. This research is expected to be useful as a reference for future researchers who will develop research on self-efficacy, peer environment, and interest in continuing study to higher education. Practical implication. For teachers of 12 State Vocational High School Jakarta, teachers can use the indicators in this study as a reference to increase student self-efficacy and pay attention to their peer environment, which will certainly affect students' interest in continuing study to higher education. For students of 12 State Vocational High School Jakarta, this research is expected to be useful for students to further improve their self-efficacy in academic terms, especially for entering college. In addition, choosing to be in a good peer environment also requires students to maintain a positive attitude. This is because peer environment greatly influences students in learning. Research limitations. 1. Lack of research discussing the variables of self-efficacy, peer environment, and interest in continuing study to higher education simultaneously. 2. The research was only conducted at 12 State Vocational High School Jakarta, so there is a possibility that the result of the research couldn't be applied to other schools. 3. Limited time in conducting research so that researchers are not able to conduct more in-depth research. Recommendation for future research. 1. Future researchers are expected to be able to include other factors that influence interest in continuing study to higher education so that the research variables are more diverse. 2. Future researchers are expected to conduct research in various schools, for example, all vocational high schools in North Jakarta, so that the research sample is more representative of each school. 3. Future researchers can use other data collection methods such as interview to obtain more in-depth information. Okay, that is all for me. I would like to apologize if there is a mistake. I really hope for suggestion from Mr. or Mrs. lecturers for better research thesis. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to my presentation. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.